Today we'll be working with some direct experience from the third condition. And Kay is here to talk about that in a very personal way. And so we will just go ahead and begin with her comments. So away we go.
It's been a long time since I've been in this seat, so thank you for letting me be with you today. I am talking about the third condition, and it has to do with family. I grew up in a family with a prevailing worldview of scarcity. My mom and dad were children of non-English speaking immigrants, and for those of you from Michigan, they were Yoopers. They grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the far western end in Ironwood and Bessemer, and they were children of Finnish-speaking parents. And each of my mom and dad, had a lot of hardship in their childhoods, and their parents had to struggle to provide for them. As children, they were often told to make do in order to get by. And then my mom and dad lived through the Depression, so that their sense of not having much was even less than that. So it wasn't surprising that the issue of money in the household I grew up in with them was rarely discussed. Money was rarely discussed, but there was often an inference about how we had very little. I learned early on, for example, that if I wanted something, as all my friends had, like a pair of new shoes, that I had to first of all solicit my mother. And if she said that was okay, and I was able to get the shoes, then I had to hide them from my dad so that he wouldn't see them. And I know that strategy wasn't protecting my mother from anything. She eventually, of course, had to tell my dad, but we didn't use it often, but I'm telling it now because it illustrates how underground and careful I felt I had to be about anything related to money. So I was most affected by this issue during the fall of my senior year in high school, when I was told then that I should apply to a commuter college not far from home because they couldn't afford a residential college. And this was a huge blow to me. I grew up in Birmingham, and most everybody in my class was going on to college, and I was sort of expecting that I would too, but they told me that might not be possible. And at the same time, I was also told that there was no money for the class trip to New York in the spring that everyone I knew would be taking. So I was very upset and devastated. Fortunately for me, I was awarded a significant scholarship that spring, one that allowed me to go to the college of my choice, Go Blue, and I was able to earn the money for the senior trip. But that lesson about scarcity was by then deeply imprinted in me. So this was the background I brought into our marriage. Lucky him. That money wasn't to be discussed openly, that anything I might buy for myself, I had to treat like contraband, and that there was always the possibility that there wouldn't be enough. So for many years, our conversations about money were really terrible. First of all, I tried to avoid them whenever I could. And Philip, though, to his credit and his financial background in economics, insisted that I know where we stood with respect to money. And so we had to have them from time to time. And when I think about this, it was pretty brave of him to ask me to do that, knowing how avoidant I was about this subject. But my experience in these conversations for a long time was terrible, was really awful. I was very, very uncomfortable. And I was present physically, but I was not there in terms of taking in any of the information that was offered. I was not at all engaged. And you can imagine that this was not a particularly great experience for either one of us. And neither one of us was having a good time with those. So eventually, once I started practicing mindfulness, though, in meditation, I decided I wanted to handle this situation differently, more like a grown-up. And so I told Philip that I was going to make an effort to be more present in these conversations and to be more helpful in these conversations. So when the time came to have one of these discussions, I began by paying attention to my body. And the experience that I had was like a cement block sitting on my chest. And the urge for me to get up and leave these conversations was powerful. If it was too strong, I would leave and go someplace where I could breathe. If it was something that I felt I could tolerate, I would sit and breathe and release until there was some space in my chest so that I could take in, so that I could actually listen to what was going on. And I signaled that we could continue in the conversation. So this became our practice, that 2 or 3 times a year we had these conversations, and gradually, over time, I had the opportunity to be with these conversations in a different way, more in an approach way than in an avoidant way. And now it's not my favorite thing to do, but yesterday we had a conversation like this, and it was just fine. But overcoming conditioning like this, overcoming this conditioning for me, took time. And it was so strongly inside me that it was physical. I had this tightness and this urge to leave. It was mental, the things that were going on in my head. Why does he make me do this? We're not going to have enough. I can't stand this anymore. And emotional. Why? I was mad at him for a while, making me do this. And I was afraid. And that combination is never very good in a conversation. So moving past this kind of conditioning meant that each of those 3 arenas kind of had to be addressed. The mental, the physical, and the emotional. And this notion of how we relate to our conditioning really matters. Whatever the resistance, whatever the object of avoidance, whatever it is that we carry over from our childhood into adulthood that constricts us or narrows us, we can begin to meet it by shifting to an approach strategy rather than a resistant one. For me, I can identify 3 attitudes that I was able to take in that helped me with this aversive relationship that I had. It was really an aversive relationship. The first one was forgiveness. I think Philip mentioned this on Wednesday. Forgiveness and not taking it personally. Understanding that the conditioning that I had as a kid was playing a role in my life now, and understanding that it didn't need to be there any longer. That forgiveness that it was there in the first place, and having a sense that maybe now is a time that I can let it go. Curiosity and interest, allowing myself to open to the feelings that I was having, so that with having practiced mindfulness and meditation, I was aware that they could be released if I was able to be with them in a way that offered them some space. And the third thing, and the most important thing of all, was kindness. Kindness towards myself, allowing myself to release the judgment for how unskillful I had been, and allowing myself the time, because this is a process that for us and for me in particular took time. It didn't happen. It wasn't a one and done. It didn't happen the first time. It didn't happen the second time. It had to happen gradually. And I think this is a really important thing, that sometimes we expect ourselves to be able to get over something that was, for me, kind of from my childhood, that was kind of childish. That kindness gives us the opportunity to say, okay, that was tough. I understand, and you are making an effort. I think that's really important. So the result of all of this, I gave myself, I had an aspiration, but I didn't have a deadline in that sense. And the result of all of this is that we can have these conversations now like we did yesterday. It helps that I don't look sour when we're having the conversations. It helps me to know. It reinforces all of the practices that we've done, all of the mindfulness practices that we've done, all of the meditation practices we've done, because it gave me a trust that something like this could be moved through, being with and moved through. But again, I think the most important thing is that this empathic awareness that we can bring to ourselves for any of these conditions that we feel so tight about, that we feel as if we're bringing over from our childhood, we can soften to them so that we can release those contractions that accompany them. And in that sense, we end up freeing ourselves from that big stone that I had over my chest and my heart. So, thank you for listening, and Philip will lead us in a meditation.
All right. Do a little practice around all this. Let's begin with 2 or 3 deep in-breaths as we settle in, filling our lungs all the way to the shoulders. Filling, 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 and holding our breath. Holding, and slowly releasing. Slowly. Feeling the sense of release in our bodies, our arms and hands and fingers. And again, one more time. Filling, filling. Even a little sense of overfilling, while also relaxing the shoulders, holding the breath, holding, and that long, slow release. And settling in to the surface you're sitting on. Finding a posture that your body appreciates. And softening. Softening all over. Identifying any areas of tightness in your body and softening. And turning our attention to our breathing. Knowing that we're breathing on the in-breath and on the out-breath. feeling the breathing throughout your body. Allowing your breathing to be just as it is. And now recalling some of the things that came up for you about your own experiences with the third condition from when you were growing up that arose as you were listening to Kay tell her story. A story that dates back to some of her earliest memories. And conditioning that showed up for her as an adult. And as you recall these specifics in your life, noticing what thoughts are arising. And labeling those thoughts. Sadness, planning, frustration. Avoidance. Allowing and accepting these thoughts just as they are. Noticing what emotions are arising. And naming the emotion. And allowing this emotion to be present. And also tuning into your body and noticing what sensations are accompanying these thoughts and emotions. Locating this sensation, chest, neck, abdomen, wherever it is. And just observing it. Focusing your attention on the sensation. Allowing it to be present. Noticing what's happening to it. Just being with it. And taking a moment to check in with yourself. How am I now? And perhaps forming an intention about how you might approach this experience from your youth in the future. Approaching, not avoiding.